Our keynote speaker this morning, our first keynote speaker is Ms. Stacey Paradis, Executive Director of Midwest Energy Alliance, and she will address the topic for this session, building codes, standards and regulations and climate change, sustainable practices for a changing world. Stacey's presentation is Building Resilience, Future-Proofing New Houses and Buildings with Energy Efficiency. As Executive Director of the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Stacey is responsible for overseeing the operations of the MWA with a 25-person staff and a $6 million budget. The MWA is a membership-based non-profit organisation advancing energy efficiency in the Midwest for sustainable economic development and environmental stewardship, and a leader in raising and sustaining the level of energy efficiency in the Midwest. Stacey has been with the MWA since 2008, most recently serving as Deputy Director, where she was responsible for the MEA's public policy, membership, corporate and foundation fundraising, marketing, organisation of conferences and events. You've got 25 staff, you seem to be doing it all. She has 20 years experience in government relations, public affairs and non-profit management. Stacey has a master's degree in public administration from George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in political science from Loyola University, Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Stacey to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be real honest, and my staff told me I had to be real honest about this. I don't usually bring my notes up here, but I am not a code official, as you heard. I am not an engineer. I am not an architect. I am a former lobbyist, so you got to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. So forgive me if I check my notes a little bit more than I normally do. So I'm excited to be here today. You're going to get to hear a different story. I think initially Kateri Callahan was going to be here from the Alliance to Save Energy, and she was going to speak to kind of more the national perspective on what we've done on codes. But Kateri is also doing her global connection. She's either in South Africa or coming back from there today, so she couldn't quite make it to Kansas City. I'm up in Chicago, so it was really easy for me to come down here, and I'm excited to be here. I think it's an interesting story for us to tell that I'll go through with you on kind of our experience here in the Midwest. So let's see, there we go. So this is who we are. Mia, we considered a large portion of the Midwest, so this is 13 states, and we are one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations that are recognized by the Department of Energy. We're all different. The one thing, though, that I think we do best between the 6 of us that we coordinate is our building energy codes work. So we all have folks that are very active in the ICC code development process, and we all have folks that are really trying to work on code adoption and compliance and everything related to that. So we're very excited for that. And I will go through kind of our policy side, but I would remiss, you did note, we do have a program side to our organization. Again, not an engineer, I'm not an architect, you know, my husband would tell you I'm not on the math side of the aisle. So those are what our programs folks do. But one of the things that they do on the program side is we actually do a lot of we do a lot of training programs as well. So we coordinate those with our policy team, and in particular our codes team. So again, we have about 160 organizational members. So we're set up as a membership-based nonprofit, so similar to a chamber of commerce, but our mission is energy efficiency. And what's interesting about how MIA is set up is that we want to have all the stakeholders of energy efficiency to be members of ours. So that means utilities, both investor-owned, cooperative, and municipally owned. State and local governments, so we have all 13 state energy offices are members of ours, as are a few local governments. They've had to drop off a lot because of budget issues in the last few years. But then we also have all the implementers, and then manufacturers and retailers. So that means the folks that are doing the windows and doing the installation and all those kind of things, they're members of ours as well. So, and our goal, as you'll see here for our mission, we are about championing energy efficiency for both the economic benefits of it as well as the environmental benefits. So here is what our policy side looks like. This is the part that I've been running since I've been with the organization. We do everything but lobbying. So we are an advocacy organization, but I don't nose count votes anymore, which is great. I don't miss that too much. But it's interesting, and as I was preparing for this presentation, one thing became very obvious that we'll talk through here in a couple more slides. Even in our own organization of only 25 people, and even within, and I think you'll see this in the energy efficiency space overall, so Maureen can back me up on this one, there is some silos that have built up in the energy efficiency world because it's thought of as everything is attached to the utility programs, and then kind of the codes people are their own little special silos because, you know, the utility guys, some of them, they don't know what an R value is, they don't know what a U factor is, they don't know any of these kind of things, so they need, it just kind of separates itself. So I think now, one of the things I'm going to talk about today is some of the opportunities to maybe build those things together, and that could lead to increased compliance, but also funding to help support that compliance. And the thing I want to note about my staff again, so on the staff on the building side, we have 4 full-time people. 2 architects, 2 licensed architects, and then 2 engineers. So, and one guy likes to throw in an MBA and some policy degrees in there too. So it's a great team of folks that love to get into here. So all this information is there. So please don't ask me too many difficult questions, or if so, I will get you the information that you need. So this is kind of the story that we want to start telling. Energy efficiency has been something that has been growing throughout the U.S., and that is investment, targeted, mandated investment in energy efficiency. I'm going to try to use this. Oh, look, yeah, it works. So in 2007, the rest of the country, you know, we have the Midwest, which is where we are right now. The East Coast, the West Coast, California, all those folks have been doing energy efficiency for about 20 years. In the Midwest, we had our good actors, our states of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, who have been doing energy efficiency for an extended period of time. But then in 2007, here is when you started to see these investments. Now, what these represent is legislation that mandated the utilities to, in every case except Wisconsin, generate savings through energy efficiency programs. Generally speaking, they had a percentage savings of their load that they had to reduce year over year. Usually it's between 1% and 1.5%. On the electric side, and on the gas side, it'll be 0.5% up to 1.2%. But what that meant is, look at all of this money that started to get investment in the region. And not only does that come with that, there's also greater knowledge of energy efficiency, there's more jobs out there, so there's greater awareness that's grown. We've also had the same growth on the code side. So this will give you a sense of where we as our states tracked from. So 2007, again, is when things started happening. On the code side, activities tied to 2009. That was related to the stimulus package that President Obama put out. There was initially, there were requirements in there for the state that to get some of their additional state energy funds, they had to get to the IECC 2009 and have that in place. And then demonstrate compliance with that then 8 years later. So that's why I think you're seeing a lot of this growth here. But there was also a lot of education that we did on what the values are of codes and why putting those mandates in place. I would say mandates are a tough word in the Midwest. The Midwest is not a fond region of having government force you to do anything. They figure if the business case is there, you should do it anyways. We think it's a combination of the two. Putting a mandate in place creates a stronger business climate and leads to greater certainty over time. But you'll see we have the same growth on the code side that we do on the residential side. So we've really had an impressive amount of growth on what we've ramped up to the latest versions of the codes. We do have a couple of states that are already on the 2015, so we're really proud of that. Here is where we are right now. So this gives you a sense state by state. And I should note, we do have 4 states that do not have a mandated state code. One of them you're in right now is Missouri. I don't see those states putting in a mandated state code anytime soon. That is just not something that they are supportive of. However, you will see these municipalities here that have picked up part of the code. One of the requirements that was part of the stimulus package, I noted, 2009 is when President Obama put that out. 2017 is supposed to be when you have to demonstrate 90% compliance. One of the things that we worked with folks on is said, okay, where's all your new growth? Where is all your new construction happening? Perhaps that is where we could put some local codes in place. That's been very successful here in Missouri. It's been a big focus on both sides of the line, as well as in two major centers up here in North and South Dakota. And that's the case both on the commercial code as well as on the residential side. So why is all this important? Jeff talked a little bit earlier about what the opportunities are. These are incredible numbers when you talk about what the energy savings are. But here's the caveat. The code just doesn't have to be on the books. The code has to be complied with. This is the big issue, right? Putting it on the books is great, but you're not necessarily saving energy. We've got to make sure that we're building to those codes. And if we do, look at the tremendous amount of savings that we're going to have. So this is kind of the eye on the prize that we have here, and these are national numbers. Now here's one thing I sat down with the staff and we talked about only yesterday. So I've been working in energy efficiency and policy for 8 years here at this organization. And for some reason, it never occurred to me to ensure that when we talk about what our overall regional investment numbers are in energy efficiency, to make sure that the investments that we're putting in energy codes, that those are also included in those numbers. Because we have 4 people on staff, we have a lot of interest, there's a lot of support both from the foundation side and the government side to achieve these codes, put these codes in place and comply with them. But look at where the money is. So you have about I think it adds up to $517 million that are part of the utility program. So that's about 1/3 of the utility programs, only in about 6 of our states. But do those include anything for code support? They do not. So right now, that code support's potentially, that's coming out of municipal budgets, which are struggling right now. That's coming out of, maybe some of that's in there, but I think we'll talk here at the end about some of the opportunities too. Again, how can we bridge those gaps? How can we break down that silo? And then how can we maybe have access to additional funding? Okay, so here is some studies that we've done, and this again ties to the fact of why code compliance is important, not just adoption. So, and you guys know all this, so just bear with me. This is the stuff they told me I had to say. We were funded by the Department of Energy to put together some studies on code compliance, and I'll go through our experiences in Missouri and Kentucky in a minute. But as you guys know, and we've already talked about, code adoption is great. Compliance is where the energy savings are. How do we make sure that compliance is in place? We need to do it through education and training. How are we going to do that? Municipal budgets are tight, state budgets are tight. What is it? How are we reaching these builders to make sure they are educated on what that new code is? And how, and our attempts here, and how do we do this in a collaborative way that's not just the hammer of enforcement coming down? How do we do this so that the education happens first so that we can work together on this process to try to get to that energy savings without being so aggressive? And so what we've done is we did a residential survey, and this kind of goes through everything that DOE put together for us. So it was 63 sets of observations with 8 requirements, and I'll go through those in a second. Each site was visited once. They were all observations. These were not to impact enforcement. All the data was anonymous, so this is just to have us to have a better understanding of what was happening in the field. The building officials were aware, but they were not there at the time. And all the results were statewide, so everything is aggregated. These are the 8 things that we tested. So foundation insulation, above grade wall insulation, ceiling and roof insulation, envelope, air leakage, duct leakage, high efficacy lighting, HVAC sizing, and U factors. We also added 3 other things in. We also put in HVAC sizing, duct design, and air changes. So what do we find out? Oops, hold on. What am I? All of a sudden, my clicker's not clicking. Will you advance it? There we go. So here's what we learned right now. So this is a whole home leakage test, and it was added in the recent years to the IEC for residential buildings. There is no requirement for this testing in Missouri, and it should be around 7 changes a minute as a maximum. The yellow line is the code, and anything to the left of that complies with the code. So obviously the builders were achieving this. This was a great example, except for our one over here on the side. I guess you're going to have to keep advancing it. I don't know why it's not working. So the next thing that we had is on blower was on blower doors. We decided to test duct in on conditioned space. Did we miss one? So even though this isn't part of the code methodology, there you go, we wanted to see how those ducts were being installed in that space. Anything to the right is worse than code for unconditioned space. Again, this is not, it isn't part of the code to test that conditioned space, but we wanted to put this in, and you could see that, ooh, we can see clouds. It's very exciting. I can guarantee you this photo is not in the Midwest. We don't have palm trees like that. Hey, that's a nice hometown. I live in Chicago. We have big buildings. There we go. Okay. So the 13 on the side, those were so bad they couldn't even actually get test data from those. So, what does all this mean? The next one over, there we go. Again, this is for unconditioned space, where it does require testing. And we found that everyone was able to meet the code here. But we did have a couple of outliers on the side that weren't in there. It is achievable, but again, this is something that we need to work on, I think is what this shows us. Next slide. The other interesting thing is lighting. High efficacy lighting, and this is something that appeared in Kentucky too. This is an issue that interestingly came up in utility programs. Thank you. In the beginning, they would give out a lot of CFL light bulbs, and then you would go to grandma's house and you would find the CFL light bulbs in the closet, so they never got installed. We found a lot of light bulbs that were in closets that were not installed, both in Missouri and in Kentucky. So it's interesting to see what that means, both from the builders. We've seen that in current construction as well. I don't know if we don't know what the issue is, but we just said it's something to note there. So just moving on that one. Let's see if I can get it. There we go. And on wall value, everything was being built just where we wanted it to be. So again, we've got a little bit of things that are kind of all over the map. Here you'll see it's right in the middle, which is right where you want it to be. So you've got definitely everybody's doing a good job on the wall insulation side. But they wanted me to put in some pictures for you. So they want me to note that all insulation, she said, quote, is not created equal. And I'm also supposed to remind you that these photos are anonymous, but these do come from Missouri. So here's one example. But here's a finding that we found a lot, which would be that insulation would not be put in properly, which of course leads to a lot of air leakage, leads to wetness and potentially to mold. So then if we get to ceiling insulation, again, this is an example of things that were going relatively well. We do have some outliers on the side, but look at this great thing that we have over here. So again, it's a story to tell and a lesson to learn as we try to work with folks. But this is great. This is where you want to be. Another picture for you. She said that you guys would like these pictures. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for in these pictures that are exciting, but she said that you're supposed to like these pictures. Should we have a little test? No, I'm just kidding. So then we get to basement insulation. So basement insulation was being included even though it wasn't part of the code. Again, these just seem to be tracks that builders are doing, but we don't know why, because it's not necessarily tied to training or anything like that. So now we move on to Kentucky. Again, Kentucky shows good compliance over here, but we have a lot that are on this side that are out of compliance on the blower door side. And again, this is one getting into the conditioned space issue. So again, this is a little different. You've got a lot more movement here, different from Missouri. So we're trying to understand what that's related to. And then unconditioned space, again, you have a lot more synergy around where they're supposed to be on the code, but not everybody's achieving it. And again, here's our lighting issue. And we need to dig into this further to have a better understanding of why this is happening. Wall insulation is looking good. But again, a little different from Missouri. We're hovering right at the line. Right at the line. A little different than where we were in Missouri. And ceiling insulation as well. But again, why are we having so many of these outliers kind of all over the place? But again, still, you're either at code or above code for the majority of the folks. So that was just kind of the synopsis of our study. There was a couple of other of these studies that were done in other states and other regions of the U.S. We, I think, had the strongest findings that came in that had something that we could learn from and try to build on going forward. One of the other things that MIA does is we host a Building Energy Codes conference. Again, we need to make sure we break out of the silos that we've put ourselves in, but we've got about 75 to 100 people that get together once a year. That includes code officials. We do some travel stipends to support them to come in and talk through where are the opportunities, where are we missing on the codes, what have we learned. The biggest thing that we're jumping into this year is going to be multifamily. A lot of issues with multifamily housing. How can we increase the energy savings there? What are some of the benefits that we can bring from it? But then you can see water's a part of that too, as well as lighting and things like that, air leakage, and then how do we get to net zero? What are the opportunities for the codes and what kind of impact is that going to have? So if anybody's interested in that or know folks are, let me know. That's in Cleveland, also in the lovely Midwest. But the biggest thing that we've picked up from all of this is we know that these buildings are going to be around. It makes sense, and you guys all know this, to build them right in the first place. But again, just to have the code on the books does not get us to where we need to be. We need to make sure that the builders are complying with it, and we need to make sure that the builders have the opportunity to get that training and education to make sure that they understand what the code is and how that's impacting their buildings. But there's other opportunities tied to it as well. Energy codes can absolutely be used with communities and states to meet their climate energy goals. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with the Clean Power Plan that's been proposed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It is currently in the legal process right now in court review. But if Hillary Clinton is elected president, it is assumed that the Clean Power Plan is going to continue to move forward. If Donald Trump is elected president, most likely not, and we will not do any commentary from that point forward. But if the Clean Power Plan goes into place, there are specific requirements that are happening on every single state. In the Midwest in particular, because we are a heavy manufacturing sector, we have very strong climate goals that we have to meet. If we can find a way to unify what kind of investment and track the savings that are happening on the energy code side with what those goals are that the states are doing, there's a great opportunity for us to meet our climate goals and also work with the utilities to get them to use within their program funds ratepayer dollars to support some of those training and education programs, which we think is very important. In Illinois, was one of the first states in our region, our regulatory commission, so in Illinois it's the Illinois Commerce Commission, has now approved and is moving forward with a new plan that would allow all utilities, so both natural gas and electric, to claim savings for any increased code compliance. So this is going to be a huge opportunity for funding, a huge opportunity to really, again, increase that savings. So even if you have a delta of, say, 70% of the buildings are complying with codes, if you can move that to 80, 85, 90%, there's going to be substantial energy savings there that are going to be beneficial to us, both from an environmental perspective and for meeting these requirement goals. The other piece of the Clean Power Plan, which is something that is still in process, is something called the Clean Energy Incentive Program. This is something that is supposed to reward states for working in the clean energy sector, so focusing on energy efficiency and renewable energy. One of the things, and again, why we're talking about multifamily more, is there's a substantial amount of opportunity in the multifamily space. What we've found, at least in the Midwest, is low-income households who take up about 70% of the multifamily housing in the Midwest, they almost pay 28 to 30% of their monthly income is related to their energy costs. which is obviously a substantial impact on them. So if we can improve those spaces, that's going to have a real benefit on those families. So that's another thing that we're looking on. And then the last thing, it happens at the municipal level with benchmarking, and that's something more that the municipalities have to comply with, but you need that partnership with the utilities. So I think what I'm trying to say in all of this is there's great opportunities. I think in the Midwest we've had really a good story to tell over how we've really increased the codes, increased our compliance with the code, and then the subsequent energy savings that come with that. But there is still so much more opportunity out there. We need to make sure that we get those stakeholders together and again, kind of look at it from a broader perspective and not just from the code world. We need to break out of that. And then I think we'll be able to meet some of these goals. And that is it. So I was a little quick today, so I'm happy to answer what questions I can. Please don't put me on the spot for anything too dangerous. It'll get myself in trouble. Yes?
In some of those results that you were demonstrating concerning some of your energy code components,
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned there were items that didn't quite meet the code.
Mm-hmm.
But did you take into account the trade-off paths that they are allowed to do so that when they trade off that
They were aware of that. That is a question that came up. Yeah, and that is something that you do need to understand. So our staff, one of our architects was around for the majority of all those testing, so they definitely looked into that because that was an issue that came up.
now, did you also document or look into what compliance path was chosen for all of these projects?
I'm sure that they did. I don't know how they included that in the study. That is something that I can follow up on with a gentleman from our staff who did that work on that, one of our technical managers. Because yeah, he really dug into this. We were surprised by some of these findings. You know, the thing that's really interesting on the code compliance side is we never quite get the result that we expect. So a lot of times we expect, you know, we'll go into a large municipal area or whatever, and we think that we're going to find lots of code compliance, and we're going to find a lot of things missing. And then you're going to go in places where there's maybe less building, and then they're right on track with the code. So it's never quite the story you expect it to tell. So that's why I think these studies are so important, and to really do them on an aggregated basis and to do it non-related to enforcement, because we all want to get to the same place. There's no point in having like a regulatory hammer come down on those. That's the intention. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the findings on the quality? Was it that they just didn't put in insulation? Did they put in the wrong insulation? Was it installed incorrectly?
It was mainly on the installed incorrectly. That was a big issue that came in, and that was a big issue also with the duct leakage. It was just not an understanding of how those should be properly installed and sealed. And now there's been so much of a connection as you talk about appliance standards going up and things like that. You know, you're putting in these very, very, on the duct side, you're putting all these very, very high-end furnaces and things like that, but they're not, even if you're getting, you know, a 92 or something like that, it's not getting near that because it doesn't have the support system in place to make sure that it's meeting those energy savings goals.
Any advocacy work that you guys are doing to try to change that?
You know, at this point, again, we're really focused on kind of what do these findings mean and how can we educate and go back to folks. All of these studies have just been done in the last, some of them have only been done in the last 6 months. So we're still kind of working through that process. The one in Missouri, we actually just completed in June. So that's something now we've turned in our report to the state, and now we're figuring out what can we do with it and what kind of opportunities are available. So I think we will get into that advocacy role. The challenging thing that we're going to have here in Missouri, and this happens everywhere, but we're going to have a governor's change. So they're going to have a new governor in place, so you're going to have a new administration, which unfortunately means the state energy office, because we're going to have a new governor no matter what Missouri will, you're going to have a new state energy office. So unfortunately, we also then have to spend another 6 months educating people on energy codes, because again, for some it's an outlier to kind of the energy efficiency world, so we need to bring them up to speed and explain them what the opportunities are.
Can I help you fill in a little?
Absolutely, Maureen, I would welcome that.
The project that the DOE is funded that Stacey has described has 3 parts to it. The first part is to do this compliance assessment in the first year and get some understanding of where the problems exist. The second component is to do training specific to what's needed in the states with the issues which, you know,
Yeah, so Maureen, thank you, Maureen, that was helpful. And that again is helpful, as I noted in Illinois, where the commission is allowing what they call a claim savings program. So this is gonna, they've already found that they think that that potential opportunity is there. This is just gonna backstop that on a national level, and hopefully it'll also lead the way to maybe some federal funding on the training side. Any other questions? Yeah, yeah.
What kind of research is your group doing on the actual delivery of the materials and the types of energy claims that they say they do? You're saying, okay, the biggest, it seems like
Yeah.
the ductwork, you mentioned the 92%
Mhm.
efficient furnace.
Yep.
If the air handling system, the ductwork doesn't do it, guess what, you lost it.
Mhm.
What about the, like insulation, doors, all that? Are you doing any actual in-place testing in addition to just doors? Are you going to work on
So right now,
insulation and such, which is
right.
big, huge?
Absolutely. So right now, we're focused on the HVAC systems. That's what we've been focusing on, just because that's something that we've been able to get. I mean, we're a nonprofit organization, so to be honest, a lot of this comes by where we get the financial support to do this. And we have a system, a installation program that we put together in Iowa that specifically focuses on how those HVAC systems are installed. It's called HVAC Saves. It's allowed in the technical resource manual for the utilities, which means they're allowed to use their ratepayer dollars and claim those savings against it. That's something that we've talked about there. We would love to kind of try to expand it to other areas, but right now we're kind of, that's the focus that we're on. We have done some work on blower doors, and that's just making sure that the tests are being done right. That everybody does, that one blower door is another blower door, that people understand how to properly do that test as well. So those are two areas that we've worked in. We haven't done as much on doors or windows or on the insulation side, but again, that's something that if we can get the funding to do, we would absolutely want to do that, because you're right, that has a huge impact. Insulation in particular. And what's interesting about insulation is a good chunk, I don't know the full percentages, but maybe Maureen knows. Do you know the percentage of insulation? Because you've got two of the biggest between Dow Corning and Dow and Owens Corning are headquartered here in the Midwest. So I would think a good production of the amount of installation is done here. And yeah, at least in Ohio and Michigan is where a lot of it is. That's where a lot of the manufacturing of it is done. Or at least where their corporate headquarters are. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys bearing with me today. Again, this is not quite my knowledge base, but it is fun. And again, even doing this, I appreciate it because it's given me the opportunity to really identify something I think that we're missing within our organization, which is better connecting it on the utility side. So thank you for that. And I think insulation might be our next way to go, so I appreciate that as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Stacey. It's interesting. You come, you know, I've come a couple of kilometres or miles in your language to visit here, and it's the same issues. In Australia, it's exactly the same. And for a non-code geek, thank you for putting the photos up. Us code geeks love them. But I think the important thing, and one thing you identified there, was the codes are one thing, it's the enforcement is another. And that's extremely important. And we're finding that in Australia at present, that the enforcement is sometimes lacking. And it was interesting, your discussion about insulation. Our government, in Australia, we're quite fortunate in that we have a national code that's adopted by all the states and territories. And, you know, and of course the climatic differences, there's quite a bit around that. As part of advancing energy efficiency, our government a few years ago decided to give every existing household $1,500 worth of insulation. It was part of the kickstart through the global financial crisis. And that was a good idea, except Australia ran out of insulation very, very quickly. And they started importing products, and the R value on the box wasn't the R value we're getting in the wall, or the ceiling. So that was a major issue there. But, you know, you've covered points in there that are extremely important. Australia's now looking at mandating blower door tests as part of our inspection regime. So, you know, codes evolve everywhere. And So look, thank you so much for that presentation, and thank you for the questions.